one of the main treatments for myelofibrosis is ruxolitinib. And ruxolitinib has been approved for the treatment of myelofibrosis for several years now, and is quite effective in reducing the size of the spleen and in improving symptoms in patients with myelofibrosis. So the drug is quite active. The downside is that there are some patients who, maybe have a suboptimal response to ruxolitinib. So the drug is doing something, but maybe they still have some enlarged spleen, maybe they still have some symptoms. The ruxolitinib is working, so they don't want to stop it because it's doing something, but they need something else to try to improve their outcomes. And so that's where we've looked with this particular study, is can we introduce a new drug with a different mechanism of action that to patients who are already on ruxolitinib, who are doing okay on it, but maybe need a little extra boost to improve their spleen size, to improve their symptoms. And can we add in this other drug on top of the ruxolitinib to try and improve outcomes there? So that's the general philosophy behind this trial. This is results from a phase 2 trial, and we've looked at different dosing regimens of the parsaclisib. This is the PI3 kinase delta inhibitor, which we know has some effect on myelofibrosis cells. And we have looked at different dosing regimens, and what we've looked at is in terms of the main endpoints. One is in terms of the size of the spleen, the other is in terms of the symptoms, and then obviously we want to look at the safety of the combination, make sure it's acceptable. And these are patients, as I said, who've already been on ruxolitinib. They're basically on a stable dose. So the dose of ruxolitinib gets adjusted up and down based on your blood counts. Most patients arrive at a relatively stable dose after a few weeks or months. And so these are patients who would, they have some splenomegaly, they have some symptoms, but wouldn't be expected to have any further benefit from ruxolitinib. And so we add on the drug, and what we see is improvements in spleen size when we add on the parsaclisib, and improvement in symptoms as well. So we use a standard symptom scale that's used for patients with myelofibrosis that incorporates many of the symptoms that I described earlier. And then we measure the size of the spleen. And so we see improvements in both of those in patients who have the parsaclisib added on to ruxolitinib. And then in terms of the safety, the combination looks like it's fairly well tolerated. Most of the adverse events are related to the parsaclisib, are relatively uncommon when we add that onto the ruxolitinib. This class of drug has been associated with some other toxicities like hepatotoxicity or rash or colitis, and we really don't see those very commonly in this study. So we were optimistic upon seeing the results of this study that this would provide some benefit to these patients who are already on ruxolitinib, and that we could add the new drug on without substantially increasing the toxicity for the patients. So we actually have 2 phase 3 studies ongoing. So one is in exactly the same setting where we did this phase 2 study. So again, patients who've been on ruxolitinib, they've had some benefit from the ruxolitinib, but they still have some spleen enlargement, they still have some symptoms. And so we're adding on the parsaclisib in those patients just as we did in the phase 2. And that's a randomized placebo-controlled trial, and that trial is underway right now with a goal to enroll, it's about 212 patients in that trial. At the same time, we initiated a second phase 3 trial, and this is for the initial treatment of patients with myelofibrosis, so newly diagnosed patients. And here we're starting patients on either ruxolitinib or ruxolitinib plus the parsaclisib. So it's upfront treatment. So rather than waiting to see if they, see what their response is to ruxolitinib alone, we're looking to treat them upfront to see if we can improve the outcomes by starting the parsaclisib at the initial stage. And that study is, again, it's ongoing and planned to enroll about 440 patients.